Please be aware, in this episode of the Life After Cardiac Arrest podcast, it gets quite emotional at times and the subject of suicide is brought up. If you feel you need any help, please talk to the Samaritans on 116 123. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Life After Cardiac Arrest podcast with me, your host, Paul Swindell. Today I'm joined by Joanna Balgarnie from Bath, who is a cardiac arrest survivor from 2014, I believe.
Yeah, that's right, 2014 July.
So you're just about coming up to 5 years. It's a very similar time frame to myself. And actually we met probably about 9 months after yours, didn't we? Back in February 2015. Can you remember that meetup?
I absolutely can remember, and the sheer joy of actually connecting with other people who had experienced the same thing. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was a bit of a punt, wasn't it, really, going back then? It was because there wasn't really, I didn't know anyone else who had a cardiac arrest, and I'm sure most of the other people who turned up at that meeting, and I think there was, with you, I think there was 13 of us, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think there were 8 survivors and then various family members. Yeah, and a fantastic meeting, and one that we all, I think we all really appreciated that connection.
How did you feel about going to a pub in London, meeting a bunch of strangers?
I didn't feel nervous, if I'm honest. I was excited. I wanted to meet other people who felt the same, and I felt like you'd made such a great effort to get us all together. And I thought it was really important that we made the effort if we could. And I'm so very glad that we did.
Uh-huh. And that, as I say, it was about 9 months after your arrest. So could you tell me a little bit about your life before the arrest?
Yeah, absolutely. My life before, I'd been an army wife for about 20 years, moving all over the country and the world. I had retrained to become a teacher about 5 years before, maybe 3 years before at that time, and had just come back from 3 years in Kuwait where I'd been working full-time as a teacher. And we'd come back to England. We were quite excited to be back in England, but also my husband had just come back from 6 months in Afghanistan. So it was a time of a lot of turmoil in our lives, and yet also kind of stability as well, because we kind of felt like we were on the homeward bound. We were now going to be living in the UK for the next few years, and the children were established at school, and I was finally teaching in the UK. I felt like everything was in quite a good place, really.
Mm-hmm. And whereabouts was that in the UK?
We were living in a place called Trivenham, which is between Oxford and Swindon.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a small village type place, is that right?
It's a small village, and it has one bus link to either Oxford or Swindon.
I sort of brought that up because that's sort of part of your story, I believe, which we can come on to later with regards to being a little bit out in the sticks.
Absolutely. It was out in the sticks, yeah. So
you've been away in jetting around the world, or been working various places, and then you've come back home, and you think so do you think you were less stressed at that point, or more stressed from doing all the move and everything? And how was your health in general?
My health in general, I thought, was fine. What I had started doing a job in quite a challenging school in Swindon, and I do think that the stress levels that I had there were quite high, just simply in the job, not in my life particularly, but I do think in the job I was increasingly stressed, more than I'd been used to. Mm-hmm. Which I think we've thought about this before, having always been told that stress didn't contribute. I do think that the pressure that I was under at that time was high. Whether it was enough to cause what happened, I've no idea.
And you mentioned that you had children as well. Were they with you at home, and were they causing stress at all?
Well, no more than the than you would expect. My two eldest, actually all three of them at that time were at boarding school. Because my husband is in the army, we get help with going to boarding school, and especially, having been apart, their education would have been very disrupted. So the elder two had been at boarding school for a long time, and the little one, who at that time was 10, wanted desperately to join them, and so she did. So she went to the same school that they did. That did cause me not stress as in agitation, but I was very upset. I did miss the fact that I had no children left at home. So that was a factor as well.
Okay, could you sort of tell me about the actual event now? I believe it's in July, wasn't it? You said.
Yes, it was. It was Jemima, my youngest, who's 10. It was her birthday, her 10th birthday, and we drove down to stay with a good girlfriend of mine, who was celebrating her 50th birthday a couple of days later and was having a party. And we went to a place in Devon that we're very familiar with. We had the most wonderful evening at the party, and then my friend had arranged for us to stay with friends of hers because there were so many people staying with her. So we stayed on a farm, not far from where my friend was, but it was in the middle of nowhere where this farm was. And so at the end of the evening, we went home, went to bed, and then had one of the luckiest things that happened. The hosts had given us a room with a double bed and a single bed. And my husband had been drinking quite a bit. We all had, so that was fine. But he snores quite a lot, an awful lot actually, when he has been drinking. So he suggested, and I agreed readily, that he goes in the single bed and Jemima and I go in the double bed. We just thought we'd all get more sleep that way. And thank God we did, because at about 5 o'clock in the morning, Jemima was awoken by me doing very erratic movements, jerky movements, and making very strange noises, like I was bubbling, foaming at the mouth. And she was frightened. And she says she fell asleep, but I can't believe that she actually did. Because she then woke again, she says. Obviously, we don't know what happens. We only take what other people tell us. And then Jemima realised something was wrong, and she did something she'd never done before, and she woke up her daddy, who just thought that I was having a bad dream. And then he thought I'd swallowed my tongue, and he tried to get my tongue out of my mouth. And he realised that my jaw was very, very stiff. And he realised then that I wasn't breathing. He took my pulse. He knew everything to do, because he had just, as I say, come back from Afghanistan, and his medical training was right tip top, thank God. And he realised quite quickly that he needed to do something. So he just pulled me onto the bed, called to Jemima to go and wake up the other people in the house, bearing in mind this was a house she'd never stayed in. She didn't know the people, and she's just 10 years old. I think it was absolutely terrifying, absolutely, which will perhaps explain what happened later. So he started the CPR. He gave me fantastic CPR, which broke most of my ribs, or the stuff between them. And he had to do it for quite a long time, because at the time that the family were telephoning, it was actually milking time on the farm. So as the ambulances arrived, they were stopped by the cows going down the lane to the farm, which is amusing afterwards, but wasn't quite so good apparently at the time. And then they came, and I believe it took 2 shocks for them to get me back, and then they drove off with me and Alistair following. So that was my event. I went to Torbay Hospital, absolutely fantastic care, and emerged a week later into the sunlight with an ICD in and wondering what on earth the hell had happened.
Uh-huh. Just going back to the actual event, probably just worth mentioning that you were saying that you were foaming at the mouth and making funny noises and funny breathing. For anyone listening, that's agonal breathing, and that's a sure sign that someone's in cardiac arrest, which obviously most people don't actually know prior.
No.
But it's something I've learned, and a lot of people have said that or partners have said that they've seen this happen to the patient, and it's a good sign. And there's a good page on the Sudden Cardiac Arrest UK website, actually, all about that, with someone actually simulating what goes on and doing a good job as well. But I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, no, and it is a really good point, and it actually that doing that breathing and doing those jerky movements were what saved my life, because otherwise Jemima wouldn't have woken up, and we don't believe that Alistair would have woken up if you're used to sharing a bed with someone else when you're married, and you wouldn't necessarily respond if you're a bit inebriated, and you just wouldn't respond, and you're tired. I don't believe that Alistair would have woken up if he'd been in the bed with me. So I'm very grateful that Jemima was, and that she responded as she did.
Yeah, a right heroine there.
Absolutely.
And so, prior to the actual event, had you felt any different to normal, or had you sort of sensed anything that was wrong in your body the previous evening or day?
No, absolutely nothing at all. And I've gone over it. I know it's very hard to remember those previous days anyway. They kind of blank out for a while. But no, I can think of nothing that was out of ordinary. None of us could. So no, it came completely out of the blue, as I believe it does.
It seems to for very many people, and hence the name sudden cardiac arrest.
Yeah, absolutely. Very sudden.
So how long do you think your husband did CPR for, or does no one know?
We think it's about 25 minutes.
Wow.
But it was I am confident it was extremely good CPR. As we all have, obviously we all had very good. But I think the fact he just wouldn't have stopped, he said.
Did he do it all on his own?
Yeah, he did. The farmer who was the people who were the family that we were staying with offered to take over for him, and he just wouldn't let them.
Yes, I know from speaking with others that it's an incredibly exhausting thing to actually have to do and go through. So my hat's off to his fitness and strength.
I know. And he said as he was doing it, the sweat was pouring down his nose and dropping on my face. And he was thinking, oh, she won't like that. She won't like that at all. But as it was, it's sorry, I'm getting quite emotional. I didn't think I would do. Sorry, Paul.
That's okay. Sorry for putting you in that state.
You haven't. It's just you know what it's like. It's quite emotional to recount. And for us, of course, it's nothing because we're out of it. But for them, you just think of their anguish, and it's horrible. Sorry, I'm fine, Paul.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on. So
Yep.
you went to the Torbay Hospital, did you say?
Yes, I did. I went there, and
was you put in a coma? Do you know?
No, I wasn't, which I think is unusual because it seems to me most people were. But I came back, after they took 2 shocks, as I say, and I was out of it for 2 days. Like there's no memory at all. But they did all the tests and everything, and it's just like so many of us came back with no understanding of what's wrong. Your heart is structurally fine. In fact, very, very good. All the tests came back negative. MRI. I don't know how many there were, but left, as I say.
It does become a bit of a blur, doesn't it, when you're in hospital?
Absolutely does. And I suppose very much I rely on what Alistair's told me, and because he didn't leave my side, and they just didn't know what had happened. Apparently, halfway through the week, there was a worry that all the lights went off. They thought I was going to have another one, but it didn't. My heart calmed itself down apparently on its own. So that was the only thing that wasn't completely straightforward. And then got the ICD and left the next day, which, after such a catastrophic event, I can remember thinking, in fact, we both thought, my God, do we just leave? You've only been in there 6 days. I can't quite believe that we're allowed to go out and without them knowing what caused it. But that is what happened. And then...
Sorry, I was just going to say they put this ICD in there because they couldn't find out what happened, and that was sort of a insurance policy, as if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just told us to go off and live our life normally, and that most people don't have any shocks, and just go and recover and create your new normal. He said nothing will ever be normal again, the consultant. He said, you go off and create your new normal, and that's what we thought we did. So that's what we went off and did. But I can remember driving up the motorway and just thinking, my God, that has just happened. It's like a bomb, literally like a bomb going off in our family. It was incredible.
Mm-hmm. I can totally imagine that. And the fact that I don't know how far away you were from your home, but it sounds at least 100 miles, is it, or something like that?
Yeah,
that must have added
at least,
to the chaos as well.
Yeah,
and,
it was very difficult, the whole thing. But yeah.
Did that add to why they discharged you after only 6 days? Because having seen what a lot of people, or the length of time that people are in hospital, it does tend to be longer than 6 days, and it does seem quite short. But
it does seem. But I think I agree with what there was simply nothing else to do. They had done every check. They had done everything, and I, with the ICD in, you're safe, aren't you? So they let me go. But where it fell down after that was because it happened in Torbay and we lived near Swindon. Nobody actually did anything. Nobody. There was no communication, as far as I know, between Torbay and Swindon, or if they did, it didn't get picked up. So basically, I was lost. I went back to the doctor about a week later to check on my scar, which was healing very well, but then nothing else happened. Nothing else happened for, I don't know, 3 months maybe. I didn't go and see a doctor. I didn't have I'd fallen through the cracks. So I can't even remember how that changed, but I think I thought, who is going to check on the ICD, because I hadn't been told anyone. And eventually I was put in contact with the Wiltshire cardiac unit in Swindon, and they were just flabbergasted that there'd be no aftercare at all. And I mean, I literally was off the radar of anybody. I say that I think the doctor thought that it was being dealt with, and everybody thought someone else was dealing with it, but actually nobody was dealing with it at all. But it all worked out. It all worked out fine, and I made the contact with the right place.
So did you come out of the hospital with any medications at all? Was there no one to actually sort of...
No medication, nothing.
So you're very similar to me in that I came out of the hospital with no meds and an ICD, but at least I did have an ICD follow-up scheduled for a couple of months afterwards. But it sounds like it was quite disjointed in your case. So they are presumably in different health service areas or hospital areas, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, it's very unusual having it away from home, and then the fact that we move around so often. You don't have an established relationship with a doctor when you move every 2 years. You hardly ever go. I don't think I'd been to the doctor for years anyway. So it was strange, but as I say, it all worked out, and I got taken on by Swindon, and they started doing my pacing checks. So I felt okay, but then I felt like I hadn't actually seen a consultant, and I mentioned it once to them at the pacing clinic, and they went, "Oh, haven't you seen anyone?" I said, No, I haven't spoken to anyone. And so they arranged an appointment for me. So it all took quite a long time, but yeah, we got there in the end. And to be honest, there were other things.
It's not great considering you've probably gone through the worst sort of trauma that anyone can go through, of a sort of a temporary dying, as it were.
Yeah.
I know some people call it clinically dead.
Yeah.
So how were you feeling in yourself those sort of months afterwards? How was your health?
My health was fine, as it takes time, obviously, to recover from the trauma to your chest, to the rib cage, and so on. And I can remember being so sad when my daughters, they would make me laugh, not on purpose, but I would laugh, and then I'd say, "Oh, please, don't make me laugh," because it hurts so much to laugh. And one of my daughters said that was so sad to think that they couldn't make me laugh because it hurt me. It was a strange time. It was really strange. I've described it as a bomb going off, and that's what it felt. It felt like the ripples of effect were on everybody. My husband didn't talk about it really. He went into himself. He was very sad. My daughters were sad and angry, and I felt, oh dear, it's very hard, this bit. I felt at one point, I genuinely thought it would have been better if I'd died because of the trouble that I'd caused. And yes, they would have been sad, but at least they wouldn't have this non-mother anymore, this non-wife, this person who just was asleep all the time and had no energy and just was, in a very strange state. So it was a tough time.
Are you okay to?
Yes, I am, Paul. I'm so sorry.
No, you don't have to apologise one bit. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm sure there are many others. If people, survivors, are listening and partners, it's a familiar story. The last person I was speaking to talked about the darkness being very welcoming and possibly at times wanting to go back there, and it's I think it just shows that there's a need that isn't being addressed with survivors, that there's the psychological impact of, as well as the obvious physical impact, but there's just something not being addressed, and there's a lot going on in the mind and the family dynamics. I mean, I imagine your husband, you mentioned he's been in the army for a long time. I'm sure he's probably seen a few things that he'd rather not have seen, but having it happen to his wife is, I can't imagine really, and I can't imagine what Tracy went through as well.
And it is the feeling that you have, even though you didn't mean to do it in any way, it is the feeling that you have created this sadness, that you have created this trouble. That was a guilt that I felt. I knew there was nothing I could do. I knew I hadn't had the cardiac arrest because of anything I'd done wrong. I knew it had just come out of the blue, but I did feel the guilt, and still sometimes, not so much now, do feel the guilt of what I had put them all through.
Yes, I totally understand that. Yes.
It was interesting, going back to one thing you said there about someone saying they wanted to go back to the darkness. And this seems to be something that people are interested in. But I have a very vivid vision of what happened when I died. And it wasn't dark at all. It was all completely light. And this isn't an out-of-body experience or anything. But I do remember very, very vividly, and the picture became clearer in the days afterwards, of being in a completely white place, of being on a ledge, all white, all smooth, no edges, just a being, and that the feeling was very much that there was a slope down on to the side of the ledge that I was on, and everything was pulling me to go down that ledge, but I just didn't want to. And I think that was me kind of wavering on whether or not you're going to go, you're going to die or not. It was a weird feeling, but it gave me huge, huge comfort. And No, I have no worry about death or at all as a result of what happened. None at all.
Hmm. I mean, do you think there's any significance in it? Do you have any sort of religious beliefs that would sort of make that happen, or is it just
No,
something?
no, I have absolutely no religious beliefs. It was, it's just simply a kind of peace. It just felt like peaceful, utterly, utterly calm. Yeah, I do take great comfort from that.
Do you have any other memories of the time? Because my experience is that I have no memory of that period at all. And I was speaking to another survivor just the other day, and she had not. She had, as I said, she had the blankness of when she was clinically dead, but she had memories of the actual arrest, and she was resuscitated a number of times,
Gosh,
and the memories of those being resuscitated and the time in between was essentially haunting her. With the and PTSD played a big part in her
right.
recovery. I mean, how? What about you? Have you got any memories of the actual
No,
time around there?
no, I've got no personal memories at all. They are all the result of what other people have told me. And their anguish upsets me, but I have no recollection at all. Apart from this kind of this whiteness, I have nothing actually of the whole time. And I think that that's been another benefit of having such a poor memory now, which I think is one of the the after effects, is actually quite a good one, because I can't remember things at all about what happened then. I can't even remember really the dark days afterwards, which again is I take as quite a blessing, frankly.
So, how would you describe your memory situation sort of now? Then, is it improved?
I think it's stabilised. I think it was shocking, absolutely shocking. It's still nowhere near as good as my peers, because I think obviously you lose some with age, but I think this is more than just normal. I do find my short term memory quite blown, frankly.
You mentioned age. Am I allowed to ask your age?
Yeah, absolutely. The cardiac arrest happened when I was 50, and I'm now 55.
And the term that people I've come to use, and I've learned from a doctor, is sequelae, is the sort of conditions or the result of something happening to you. So the memories are a sequelae of the cardiac arrest or the hypoxia. What other sequelae have you suffered from or noticed that's different to how you were before?
I would say that in those few months after the cardiac arrest, it was the memory, but it's actually the medication that I then went on beta blockers following a subsequent shock, just under a year later, and that the effects of the beta blockers for me were extremely, they were dreadful. They were absolutely dreadful. They are the reason that things took a long time for me personally to get better.
What beta blockers were you put on?
Oh, Paul, I can't remember. I can't remember.
That's a good example of your bad
Yes,
memory.
absolutely. There you
Yeah,
go. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But
that's
I
okay.
was on initially 2.5 milligrams of whatever they are, and then they went up to 5.
But by
And
soprolol?
bisoprolol, that is the one. I can recognise it, I just can't remember it. And I was on those for 3.5 years, and they sapped my joy, basically.
Uh-huh. But you did mention earlier that you I think said spent a lot of time asleep. Was tiredness and fatigue a problem?
Tiredness and fatigue was a problem as a result of the of I guess of the recovery of the whole event. Yes, sorry, I should have added that. You see, again, my memory. But but that and in those early days I was asleep for 20 hours of the day when I first came back, which I guess is what people would perhaps be doing in hospital, but I carried on sleeping. I was asleep all the time in my memory, my very limited memory. But that slowly got better as I healed physically and so on, and that we sorted things out in our family, because there were other effects there. But the beta blockers, they didn't just make me tired, which they did. They sapped I felt like I lived in a fog. They sapped my joy. God, I'm making it sound very dramatic. Yeah, they really,
No,
I hated them, but realised there was nothing else that could be done at that time, because unlike many of you, I had a subsequent shock. So I had my first shock in May, bearing in mind that was like 10 months, I think, after the first cardiac arrest. And I'd had food poisoning the night before. And so I guess I was dehydrated. And it was polling day in 2015. And my husband had come up because he was going to vote where I was staying at that time, because I moved to be nearer my daughter, who was at boarding school. And anyway, so I'd had this bad food poisoning, although I thought it was food poisoning, but he didn't get it and we'd eaten the same meal, so perhaps it wasn't. And I woke up early in the morning, and I had been sleeping on the sofa because I knew I was disturbing him. And I went back into the bedroom, and as I walked into the bedroom, and almost like a bubble is up in the air, I said, "My heart is beating incredibly fast." And as that came out of my mouth, and I just sat down on the bed, and he'd put his arms around me, I got the most almighty shock to my body. I had no idea what had happened. I came round blinking and had no idea what it was. Apparently I'd screamed out. He could feel a jolt in me, but didn't know what it was. And then I realised, almost as quickly as that had happened, that it must have been a shock. And just as I realised that it had been a shock, I had another one. And then I had another one. They're about 20, 30 seconds apart. And this isn't going to be helpful, what I'm about to say, I'm afraid, because although after one shock, it wasn't too bad, if I could say that, because by the time I'd realised what had happened, it was over. But when I had a second one, and then a third one, and thinking that there was going to be another one, it was absolutely horrendous. The people talk about it being like you're being kicked by a horse or something. Well, I've never been hit by a horse, and nor have I been shot. But I felt like I'd been shot in my chest. That's what it felt like a bullet had gone through my chest. And if there had been a big red button that I could have pressed that would have ended my life at that minute, I would have pressed it, through sheer panic of the effect that this was happening, and that it had happened once, twice, 3 times. So I know that all sounds very dramatic, but it really was tough. It was really tough.
I can imagine it was. I mean, I haven't been in that position to have received a shock from my ICD, so I don't personally know what it's like. But I've heard similar recounts, basically, of what you just said. That the first one, especially if it happens while you're asleep, you might not even notice it, or it's over before you do notice it. But I've also heard of many people suffering from anxiety and worry about it's going to happen again, and it sounds like that's what happened to you. And but I think you're probably quite unusual that you've had multiple shocks within I wouldn't call it a shock storm, maybe, but
No.
Obviously something wasn't quite right with your heart, and it needed to fire multiple times. But
I think I was just incredibly unlucky. I mean, obviously, we're all unlucky that it happened, but I think I was unlucky that happened as it did. I think I was probably dehydrated, so I always take great care now to make sure that I am hydrated. I always have Richard's banana. One of the people that we met together, do you remember? At that first meeting was a fantastic guy called Richard, and he told us about how he always had a banana in the morning to, I think it's for the potassium, but it might be the magnesium, forgive me.
No, it's the potassium. Yes, that's
Potassium.
right.
And so every morning I have Richard's banana, and so I
Does he know
do.
you call it Richard's banana?
I don't know if he does. That might be rather bizarre. Yeah. So I do think that being dehydrated had a big effect. Had something big to do with what happened that time. I do really, and not least because I'd had D&V, and I suspect all my salts were out of sync. And I also now always carry a little bag of salts. The little rehydration salts. So if I'm ever feeling a bit electrolytes, if I'm ever feeling a bit woozy, I will have one. Even now, so it's something that I do that is kind of part of my armory to try and avoid that. I think that shock experience was from the dehydration and the imbalance of my salts. That's what happened. As a result of that one, I was put on beta blockers.
And they tend to reduce your heart rate, don't they, considerably? So hopefully,
yeah, they did, and so that carried on. And then a year later, I had another shock. So I was in Scotland, away, of course, always, and I had a home monitor then. So I had then said to Alistair that I was feeling a bit funny. And he'd gone to get me a cup of tea. This was early in the morning. Everything for me happens between 5 and 8 in the morning. So this would happen early in the morning. And he said, I'll go and get you a cup of tea, because I was going to have a shower, but I felt a bit funny. And he went out to get the cup of tea. I don't remember anything else. And he came back in to see me jolt off the bed. So, and then the next thing I see from him going out to make me a cup of tea. And the next thing I see is him right in front of my face going, "Are you all right? Are you all right? What's happened? Do you feel okay?" And I had absolutely no idea what had happened. So had clearly passed out and had the shock. But even then we didn't know whether or not I'd had one until we got home. And we got home about midnight that night, and Alistair made me sit in front of the home monitor for 20 minutes before we went to bed. And the next morning, first thing in the morning, the hospital rang me and said, "Come straight in. You've had another shot. You're not allowed to drive," which was a bit of a blow, because I'd just got a new job and I was about to start that the following week. But I then went in. They changed my setting on my ICD, which had been set with the lowest setting as being 50. They made it to 70. So that again had quite an effect on me. It was quite a demoralizing effect, because of course I'd had another shock. I couldn't drive, and now not only was I on the beta blockers, but I was also, the lowest rate of my heart was 70. So I felt like I felt bizarre, frankly. So that was that one.
What was the reasoning by raising your lowest heart rate to 70? Because
the reasoning for that was because when they looked at the ECG, as I understand this, they saw 2 ectopic beats, and they thought that was as a result of the heart going too slow, the heart rate being too slow. And they thought that by raising it up to 70, that would avoid me having ectopic beats. Apparently there was an ectopic beat, and then I went into cardiac arrest. That's what they saw on the trace after that one.
And how's it been since?
Oh dear, Paul. Then I had, then I was called one day out of the blue, and this was it. I stopped driving then. A, I'd lost my confidence, and B, I just I understood that I was going to lose it then for 2 years, because it had been a second shock, and they had no idea why. So I stopped driving, kind of for good, really. And it was coming up to the time when I was thinking I was getting my confidence back, that I thought maybe it's about time that I could drive again. And literally, I know other people. I've heard another person has said they were doing this. I was filling out the forms when I got the phone call to say, filling out the forms for the DVL, when I got a phone call from the hospital to say I'd had a shock that morning, which I had absolutely no idea about. Actually, when I say a shock, what I'd had was, I think, what you had when the ICD delivers therapy, but it didn't give a complete shock. Is that right?
I haven't had that. No, I had a self-terminating episode of VF, or a couple of them. So my ICD, I think, takes about 8 seconds to charge up, but my episode had stopped before it had finished charging. So it didn't essentially do anything for me because it was too quickly. But
I think that mine was something like that. It wasn't a full shock, but it was something like it was about to be a shock.
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's similar.
Sometimes
but it had definitely, it had delivered therapy, but not a full shock.
Yeah, sometimes that's right. They can deliver a therapy to try and pace you out of going into VF.
That's what happened. So that happened in the January. So then it wasn't going to be, I would say I wasn't going to be driving then. And then, so I waited 6 months for that and applied for my license again. And then while I was waiting for the license to be processed, I was constantly ringing the DVLA. I had another shock in my sleep in August last year. So that put paid to that again. So then I realised that I needed to do something drastic. So I had been talking to somebody in our group who was someone who had had a cardiac arrest, but then had had subsequent shocks. And
was he idiopathic?
He was he had been idiopathic, but then he had been diagnosed with a tentative diagnosis of early repolarization syndrome, which is very similar to Brugada. I think I may be wrong, but it's not necessarily genetic. I'm not sure. Anyway, he told me about this other drug that he did, which was quinidine, which is used to treat malaria and is not actually licensed for the treatment of life-threatening arrhythmias, but that they had let him have it. And he hadn't had any subsequent shocks. I think now, as we are now, I think he's 7 years down with no shocks, having had, like me, several shocks. And he was driving and everything. He was my inspiration, and I met him through the Facebook group as the only other person that I'd come across who had this similar kind of diagnosis. And so I went to the doctor, my consultant, brilliant consultant that I'm under, Julian Ormond in Oxford, and he started the process of trying to get me the same drug. And also I wanted the 70 setting changed on my ICD. I felt like that whatever they were doing wasn't working and I needed something to change. And with his support, I finally, just before Christmas, got onto hydroquinidine, 300 milligrams. And that has been absolutely fantastic. I came off the beta blockers, and I can now walk up hills. I stay awake all day. I am so much happier as a result of this new drug. And I don't know how much of it is in my mind, but I tell you, it's brilliant. I think also I feel like it's almost my last chance. I know they can increase the dosage, but it does have quite a few side effects. And so I wouldn't really want to increase the dosage, but touch wood and fingers crossed, this seems to be working for me. And touch wood, I haven't had any shocks since August last year.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear that. I must admit, I hadn't heard of, was it hydroquinidine?
It's hydroquinidine, or it can be also called just quinidine, or it can be, I believe the other guy is on quinidine sulfate, but they're all very similar.
Quinidine, the only mention that, or the only reason I know that isn't that in gin and tonic?
Well, I think it's an ancient cure. I think it was a Red Indian cure, a Native American cure. So it has all sorts of benefits, I think. But yeah, I think you are right.
Well, so you mentioned that it has some side effects. Do you know, are you experiencing any of those, or is it only in higher doses?
No, I did at the beginning. You have very, very bad, uh, like almost constant diarrhea at the beginning, but that goes. Um, and I did get quite a few headaches, but then I know so many people, you especially, have had bad headaches, so I kind of thought, well, hopefully it will pass, and touch wood, those have passed as well. And I also made a really conscious decision not to read the information pack, a leaflet with all the possible side effects, because I thought I might get them then. And also they were written in French, so that helped me avoid reading those. So yeah, honestly, that's been really a real life changer for me.
That's great to hear. Talking about life changing, you mentioned basically that several times you lost your license, and I think you're not driving now. Is that right? And
No, I am. I am
oh,
now driving.
oh, you are.
The DVLA finally sent my license through based on the July request that I'd put through. However, they didn't know about the shock I'd had in August, so they sent me my license. It took them 9 months to agree it, and then I spoke to them and said, "I've just got this license. Is that true that I'm able to drive?" But then we realised that they didn't know. I hadn't told them about the August shock. So they did a kind of quick assessment, and they said, as long as your doctor is happy for you to drive, you can drive, and just we need all that information now. And so I'm driving at the moment based on the fact that my consultant is happy for me to drive. And so yes, finally, after 3 years, I'm driving again.
Yeah, that's great. Because
Thank goodness.
yes, I believe, or I know that it caused you a lot of not inconvenience, but well, yes, inconvenience, but trouble, because, as we mentioned at the beginning, you were living in a small village outside of Swindon, and you were just about to start a new job, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. And yes, it has really did cause us to really rethink everything. So another fantastic thing that I got through our group was I was about to start this job. I'd lost my license after that second shock, and one of the people on the information, on our group, said about access to work. Access to work enabled me to get a taxi to and from my job. I was working 2 days a week, and I did it for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And I think it's, say, 75 or 80% of the fare was covered by the government, and the rest was paid by me. And that was simply incredible. That was I was so grateful that I was told about access to work. I was so grateful that I made contact with, I was able to carry on working, and I had a most fantastic job for that time. And I got an award for my job for that term, a Teacher of the Year award for, I think, going above and beyond. Even when I'd been ill, I carried on doing the job.
Your access to work. Could you briefly tell me the process that you had to go through to claim, and was it onerous?
It wasn't onerous at all. It was very straightforward. I can't remember the actual detail of how I got it, but it really was straightforward. So I just went onto a website, put in access to work, would have got through to somebody who's incredibly helpful. They're so supportive. What could they do to help me to get to work? Whether or not it was public transport, or in my case, it was a taxi, and how they could help me to do it and to afford it. I had to keep all the receipts, and I would send in the claims. The money came in straight away. It was a really good process, and would have carried on for as long as I didn't have a license. So that was something that I was really grateful for.
Yeah, sounds excellent, which is quite a surprise from a government system.
Absolutely. Well, they explained it to me by saying that it was because they wanted the revenue from the tax and the national insurance. So it was worth it for them to keep me in work, quite apart from, your own mental health and how much one needs to work to feel useful.
So, how far were you travelling, and how much was the taxi costing?
It was quite a lot of money, actually. I think it was about, I think it was £26 each way. So £52 a day, of which I think I paid about 40 something. The government paid 40 something, and I paid about £11-12.
So, to actually claim it, did you just say, I'm not allowed to drive because of they've taken away my license?
I had to have evidence. I had to have a letter from the DVLA and from my doctor. But again, really quite straightforward things to get hold of.
Oh, good. When I interrupted you earlier, you were just about to tell me about another change in your life.
Yeah. So what we did as a family, my husband, as I say, had been in the army for a very long time. He was offered a job in the Middle East, which sounds absolutely bizarre, but I felt very strongly that his life, the life that we'd expected, bearing in mind this was when I was on the beta blockers and that I was not working. I was not a very good person to be around. And I felt like I had spoilt his life and that he was just going to spend the next few years kind of living out the end of his military career. And I just wanted something to improve things for him because he'd given me back my life. And I know that sounds all very dramatic, but we talked a lot and finally came to the decision that he would leave the army. And so he left the army and he moved to Kuwait. And he is very, very happy in his job. He loves earning a lot of money. And we were, as a result of the money that he now earns, we are able to live the life that we want we moved out of the village and moved to Bath. Thought, where in the world do we want to live? And thought Bath would be, if you could choose anywhere, that we wanted to live in Bath. It meant that whilst I couldn't drive, it made no difference. I got a free bus pass from the council, again, as a result of having a letter from the doctor and from the DVLA saying that I couldn't drive. The council gave me basically an old age pensioners bus pass, which meant that I could walk downhill. So we live on a hill, but I could get the bus up the hill, which again was fantastic. So we moved to Bath. We moved to Bath as a family. He moved to Kuwait. He's fulfilled in himself and in his job. My youngest daughter, Jemima, who'd been with me when I had the cardiac arrest, came out of boarding school and lives at home with me now. And we made various other changes to kind of, I call it crafting the life I want, to kind of work out what it is that we all wanted to make us happy. And that's what we've done. So
you mentioned your daughter there. Did she come home partly because of what had happened to you and your husband moving away?
Jemima, the story of Jemima is a difficult one for me to tell. So I'll tell it as well as I can and hope I won't get upset. Jemima, when I first had the cardiac arrest, bearing in mind it was July and she went back to boarding school in the September, we saw that she was really, really disturbed. All the children were disturbed. We were all unhappy, but we didn't really know why. Jemima was the one who was affected the most. She stopped eating. She was sad and she was as good as you could possibly be. She was so good all the time. It wasn't at all normal. It was frightening for all of us. We were just all trying to get back to normal. So we would constantly be saying to her, just get through to the weekend. I got a brought her home, or Alistair brought her home every weekend. Just get through to the weekend, and then it will be fine. I don't know why we didn't just bring her home, but I suppose it was that desperate need of ours to get back to normal, whatever normal was. And that if we brought her out of school, that was a dramatic thing to do, because if you take a child out of a boarding school situation in the military, as we had then, she wouldn't have been able to get back. And we were worried that would jeopardise her future. If we moved abroad, she wouldn't have the continuity of education that the allowance is given for. So there were lots of things involved in our decision making. Not least, we just wanted it to be normal. We wanted me back to work. We wanted Alistair back to work, and the girls to be okay. And just through sheer wanting it, rather than actually looking at the situation as it was. Anyway, Jemima came home one day, and we had yet another conversation. We're sitting around the kitchen table, and she broke. She just broke. We'd been called in by the teacher to say that she was just walking around the playground on her own. She wasn't talking to anyone. They were desperately worried about her. She seemed so unhappy. She wasn't behaving badly. She was trying her best at her work, but they keep seeing her just gazing into the middle distance and looking so unhappy. And so we were talking about this and saying, well, darling, what can we do? We'll do anything we can to help you. You can come home if you want to. We'll do whatever you want. And so we're around the kitchen table, and then she kicks the chair back, and she just shouts at us and says, "You have no idea what it was like. You didn't see your mummy die in front of you. You didn't watch what happened. They had taken her down in the farmhouse. They were looking after her beautifully and kindly, but she said her memories were so vivid. She shouted at us, describing the room with blue flashing lights all round, flashing around the lights from the ambulance, and the people running up and down the stairs. And then she said the thing that broke our heart the most, and she said, then they started to bring me down on a kind of chair bed thing with all these wires and a mask over my face. And she said she quickly turned her face away because she simply couldn't bear to think that would be the last view of her mummy. And she said all this, and it all came out, and it was absolutely horrendous to experience. And then we decided then that we would do anything we could, because she'd clearly had some kind of a breakdown. We then just comforted her and took her up to bed, and she slept for nearly 24 hours solid. And then we sorted out with the school that she'd no longer be a boarder. I moved to a flat in Monmouth where she was at school, and then took her out of the school at the end of the school year. And the army and the school were brilliant and sorted out the funding for it. And and so that was Jemima's PTSD story. Except that the good thing about it was, because we took her seriously, because we enacted the changes, the change was almost overnight improvement. The teacher said to us, even on the first week, she said, "I've got back a new girl. She's so much happier because she's now living at home. She's eating properly. She put weight back on. She just came back to life again." And we also arranged for her to see a mental health agency, and they just had one interview with all of us, and then 1 hour and a half of her on her own, and she came out of it practically skipping. And I think what had happened was that we had taken her seriously, and also we had she'd really been heard and by these mental health nurses who'd really taken her seriously, as she'd wanted to be. She knew we took her seriously, but she wanted people to realise what had happened to her. And ever since then, although I keep a very close eye on her mental health, she is in such a much better place than she was then.
Yeah, that's an incredible story there, and I think I mean, as one thing that I always think, and a lot of others have said that the partners and the witnesses of a cardiac arrest go through probably the worst trauma they're ever going to go through, and they tend not to get the help and care that they need unless it really gets to critical mass or critical point in their lives, and there needs to be some sort of debriefing or sort of a care plan for them as well, I believe.
I believe that really strongly, yeah. Really strongly. I couldn't agree with you more. But you kind of muddle through, don't you? And we did get what she needed. But then I also have two other daughters who also, I won't go into their stories, but, it affected everyone. I don't know that we helped everyone.
Yeah, it's affected me. It's a very, very moving story, and
oh, I'm sorry. It is.
That's all right. I know, and I know exactly what you're going through. I'm incredibly fortunate that my children weren't around when mine happened, but I really take my hat off to you for sharing, which is obviously incredibly painful memories. But hopefully, other people can learn from it and lessen the pain for some others in the future.
Well, it would be wonderful if it did, and I do think, like you've said, then if the support was available for the wider family as well. I mean, not everybody's going to be affected, but those that are, it makes a huge difference if you're taken seriously, if your concerns are taken seriously. And I know that we did the right thing by Jemima. So I am quite proud of how we dealt with it in the end. We couldn't help the cardiac arrest happening, but we were able to affect how we dealt with what it took us a while to see what was happening, and I can forgive us for why it took a while, even though I wish it hadn't taken us as long. But I'm so glad we did what we did to support her and get her through that.
Well, in the past 5 years, you've been through quite a lot and made a lot of changes to your life, haven't you? And
I have indeed, yeah, we have. And actually, the changes are fantastic. So the biggest change was moving to Bath, and living in a place where I can walk to everything, so that if I do ever lose my license again, it would be sad, but it wouldn't be the end of the world at all. Although also the other thing that you learn, don't you, is nothing is the end of the world except the end of the world. And I think that's the other thing that I take from what has happened to me, that you have to work out what it is that you want in life and try and make it happen. So I have done various things in my present life that have really kind of fulfilled dreams for me. We finally got a dog. You could perhaps hear occasionally,
yeah.
little noises. And Mr. Chu has come into our life and has changed it dramatically. Not only does he give everyone in the family a fantastic focus of love and comfort and adoration, but also he gets me out and I walk for an hour, up to an hour, every day, because I have to, but also because getting out and walking is just been the most fantastic activity that I could have done. I know people do all kinds of different activities, but just walking outside in nature it just makes you glad to be alive, seeing the changing seasons, meeting other people, talking to people. Just, it is so life enhancing to have a dog in your life on every level. I really think they should be issued by the NHS in so many ways, that they're just fun. He is brilliant. He's only a tiny little Yorkshire Terrier, and yet his effect is phenomenal. So that was one thing, getting a dog. I also feel really, as so many of us do, feel like I wanted to give something back. I wanted to do something. I know many people do raising money for defibrillators or whatever they do, whatever they choose. I admire that enormously. I personally wanted to fulfill a dream that I'd wanted for a long time, which was to become a Samaritan. So once we settled into Bath about 2.5 years ago, I started my Samaritan training, and I now do that, and it has been incredible, absolutely incredible, on so many levels. I feel like I do something that's really valuable. I have made great friends, and I've got involved because I've got time. I've got involved in the running the branch in a more proactive way as well, which again has been really satisfying. And it's not giving back as far as the what happened to us, but it's giving back in another way. And I'm really glad that I've been able to have the life that I can do this. And finally, the other thing that I do now is I've always wanted to write. And so last year I started an MA in creative writing, which again gives me enormous pleasure. And I really feel that has, there are lots of other things, but those, I really feel like I'm crafting the life that I want. I'm living the life that I want and trying to enable the people I love to do the same.
That sounds fantastic. It's amazing what you've achieved and through the adversity that you've gone through. Again, I'll take my hat off to you for doing all of that.
Well, the other thing that I'd say, which this is bizarre after all the things I've told you and crying and everything, but I honestly now think I am actually glad that it happened. The cardiac arrest. If I could turn the clock back and it didn't happen, I don't know that I would.
I know you're not the first person who's actually said that to me. I know Michelle Edmonds, she used to say that, and I was like, I can't believe it. Why would you think that? And
I know.
But Dr. Keebles also said to me, and he said, when I've heard him talk, he says that for a lot of people, it's the worst thing that's happened. A lot of people, it's something that happened and it's made their life totally different. But there are some people who actually it's the best thing that's happened to them, and it's quite bizarre.
I think it's also about it's about choices, though, isn't it? Because I really do not want to be a victim of this. I am a cardiac arrest survivor, not a victim. I had something, as we all did, had something terrible happened. And I just feel that it's my choice on whether or not I go down with that, just as it was my choice whether or not to slide down that road, that slope I told you when it was all white. It's my choice to either go with all the gloom and doom and all of that, or to try and make something good out of something horrendous. And that's what I've tried to do.
You okay?
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay.
It's like open therapy.
Well, I was going to touch on that a little bit. Have you had any therapy or counselling at all for what's happened to you?
Well, I think this is quite a funny story, but it wasn't at the time. I went one of the early times when I went to the doctor, quite soon after it happened. I went to the doctor and I said, I think I need some help with this. I don't think I'm coping very well. It was when I had my darkest thoughts. And so he arranged for me to see a counsellor at the surgery. And I went along to the counsellor and I told her the story, and I couldn't stop crying. I was gulping and sobbing and all sorts of things. And at the end of the session, she said, she kind of took a deep breath because she just said, I think that what you're feeling is completely understandable because what you've been through is so terrible. And that was it. That was what she offered me. And I'm afraid that wasn't enough. So that was never enough. So I kind of lost my confidence with asking for any counselling. And I have just tried always to, on my long dog walks, when I'm not listening to podcasts or or desert island discs or whatever, I talk to myself and try and work it all through. I mean, I feel I have worked it through nearly 5 years, and I feel I'm working it through. I feel okay about it all now.
You've come to some acceptance of it all.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I have. I'm at peace with what happened.
I mean, I interviewed. I mentioned prior to starting the podcast that I was talking with one of the nurses at the CTC, and we talked about the video they did, which has happened to be called "Life After Cardiac Arrest" as well. And in that, there's a psychiatrist, and he talks about something called adjustment disorder. Now, I must admit, I'd never heard of that before, but I think it's very applicable to us, and that it does take a while for people to adjust to their life again, because nothing is normal in air quotes again, really, is it? It's
No, it isn't.
One of the things that I've always found good, and I think you did as well, is meeting other survivors and partners, getting to meet other partners. And I know you came along to the Guinness World Record last year, and you also came to several other previous ones, and even organised one in your new home city of Bath.
Yes, we did. Which was wonderful to do. Trudy, who's another survivor who lives quite nearby, and I did it together. And I can't remember how many. There weren't many, but you do really feel with people who've experienced it more recently than us that it makes a massive difference to share your experience with people who've been through it already, who really get it. Like, as we've always said, I don't know about you, but I don't feel the need in the same way to share my cardiac arrest story so much, because we're that much further down the road, and because of how I feel about it. But I really see value in being able to hear other people's experiences, and for them to know that you know where they're coming from, you know the trauma that they're going through, but you also know that it will get better, because it has got better for you. And for most of us, over time, as time does her magic, it really does, things become easier. And it's lovely to be able to pass that message on in whatever capacity.
Indeed, I think that's what I hope, that people will stay in the group as they progress through their recovery, so that they can sort of feed back their experience, exactly how you just said, that people do take time to process it and adjust over months and years, and it's always good to let the new people in the group know that it will get better, just like you said.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And we've got another big meetup in September in Oakham, in the centre of the country. Are you coming along to that?
Yes, both Jemima and I will be there. We've booked already.
Oh, excellent!
I think we did it before. It was made open to the group. So I wanted to have a room that I wanted the room that I wanted. And so I booked it straight away as soon as I heard about it.
Oh, brilliant.
And Jemima's very excited about the pool. So we will be there.
Excellent. Well, it's got it's a very nice hotel and got lots of nice facilities. So it's certainly got, if she's not too interested in listening to the talks, she's got plenty she can go and pamper herself with, because I imagine, she'd be 15 or so now. Would that be right?
Yes. Yeah. She's 15 she's 15 in July. So she might be too young to do some of the things, but we might smuggle her in. She's very tall.
Okay, I think we're sort of probably coming towards the end of it now. And
yep.
One thing I like to ask survivors and partners of, what tips and advice have you got for other people going through the similar thing? Although you've given some great advice and tips already, so I don't know if it's superfluous, this question now. But if you can,
if I've had to say, thinking about what we've said now, I would say, well, there's so many things, aren't there? But we are survivors. We are not victims. We choose how we react to this. That's probably the most important message. And get a dog. Get a dog, and don't look back. Look forward.
I say it's always been on my mind, because I've heard so many other people say that as well, and I think, I don't know if I can face with all of the nasty bit at the end that you have to do with the dog, but I seem
the
a lot
nasty
of people,
bit at the end of the dog, or at the end of the dog?
When you take the dog out for a walk and it does its business, and you can't.
Oh no! Well, then get a small dog. Get a small dog.
Was that your reasoning behind getting a Yorkshire Terrier then?
No, that little thing just came into our life. That's another story. That's a whole nother story.
It's funny that the twists and turns that life takes us, eh?
Absolutely. Very much so.
Well, I've taken well over an hour of your time, and you've taken us on a incredibly emotional journey through the last 5 years of your life, Joanna, and I'm incredibly honoured to be able to speak with you on it, and I really, really thank you, and I hope lots of people get some nuggets of hope and joy out of some of what you've said, because you've really shown that there is light at the end of the tunnel, with the sort of positive things that you're doing with your life and the dark times that you've had as well. So thank you very much again, and I look forward to seeing you and speaking with you and Gemma in September. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sorry I cried, but you got me warts and all.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye then.